When a girl who grew up in the system inherits a forgotten piece of land, everyone assumes it's worthless. But what she discovered there, locked away in an old tool barn, wasn't just about property. It was about a promise kept across generations. If you've ever felt underestimated or like you've been handed a raw deal, I think this story will mean something to you. Stick with me, and if it does, maybe hit that subscribe button, because we're building a community here for people who know what it's like to fight from the ground up. The day I turned 18 was the day I legally ceased to exist as a problem for the state of Illinois. There was no cake, no party, just a cardboard box containing 10 years of accumulated files, reports, and assessments that were supposed to add up to me. The box was heavy, but my future felt terrifyingly light, like a single sheet of paper about to be caught by the wind. My caseworker, a tired woman named Ms. Albright, whose kindness had been worn smooth by bureaucracy, handed me a bus ticket and an envelope. "This came for you," she said, her voice neutral. "From the lawyer handling your grandfather's estate." I hadn't seen my grandfather since I was 7, the year before everything fell apart. The memory of him was hazy, smelling of sawdust and damp earth. An estate. The word sounded grand, important. For a dizzying moment, I imagined a windfall, a sudden reversal of fortune, the kind of miracle you read about. The other girls in the group home, who had gathered by the door to watch my official expulsion into adulthood, snickered. "An estate," one of them, Jenna, mocked. "Right. Probably a box of old screws he forgot to throw out." I clutched the envelope, its crispness a stark contrast to the worn-out feeling in my soul. Later that day, I sat in a sterile, gray office that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. Mr. Davies, the lawyer, was a man made of straight lines, straight posture, straight mouth, a perfectly straight part in his thinning gray hair. He didn't offer condolences for the decade of my life spent in state custody. He simply opened a folder. "Elara," he began, his voice as dry as old paper. "Your grandfather, Arthur Vance, passed away 2 years ago. As you were a minor and a ward of the state, his assets were held in trust. Upon your 18th birthday, they transferred to you." He slid a single, folded document across the polished desk. It was a deed. "He left you his property, 2.5 acres in Havenwood County. There's a small house and a barn." He paused, and a flicker of something, pity perhaps, crossed his face before it was gone. "It's rustic. Hasn't been lived in for some time. The property taxes are minimal and have been paid up for the next year. There's also a cashier's check for $500 to cover immediate expenses." He pushed that across the desk, too. $500. 2.5 acres of forgotten land. That was it. That was the grand estate. The hope I'd foolishly allowed to flicker inside me died, leaving a familiar, cold ash in its place. Jenna had been closer to the truth than I was. "The land isn't worth much," Mr. Davies continued, shuffling his papers, already moving on. "It's undeveloped, rocky soil. A development company, Ridgeview Corp., has an open offer on it. $10,000. Frankly, I'd advise you to take it. It's more than you'll ever get otherwise." He handed me a business card and another letter, this one bearing the sleek corporate logo of Ridgeview. "Call them when you're ready to sign. It's the smart move, kid. A clean break." A clean break. My entire life had been a series of clean breaks, of jagged cuts from everything I'd ever known. This inheritance felt like the final severance. It wasn't a foundation, it was an anchor, dragging me down to a place no one wanted. I took the papers, my hands numb. I didn't say thank you. The word felt hollow, a lie. Outside, the city noise was a roar. I stood on the pavement, clutching a deed to a place I couldn't picture and an offer to sell a memory I barely had. $10,000 felt like a fortune and an insult all at once. It was the price of my grandfather's entire life, and everyone agreed it was a bargain I should jump at. The bus ride to Havenwood County was a descent into green and gray. The further we got from the city, the more the steel towers gave way to sagging telephone poles and endless fields of corn, their stalks brittle and brown in the late autumn chill. The other passengers were mostly older folks, their faces etched with the kind of quiet endurance I recognized but didn't yet understand. I stared out the window, watching my reflection flicker across the passing landscape. A girl with tired eyes and a future that felt as empty as the seat beside me. The bus let me off at a crossroads with a single blinking yellow light. There was no station, just a gravel shoulder and a weathered sign that read, Havenwood, population 412. The air was different here. It was heavy, wet, and smelled of decaying leaves and wood smoke. It was the smell of my grandfather's workshop, a ghost of a memory that made my throat tighten. The town, if you could call it that, was a short walk down the main road. It was a single street with a handful of storefronts, a dusty general store, a post office, a bar with a neon sign that fizzled weakly in the daylight, and a boarded-up diner. It was a place time had forgotten, or perhaps a place that had chosen to be forgotten. I went into the general store. A bell chimed, announcing my arrival to a man behind the counter who looked as old as the wooden floorboards. He was wiping down a glass case filled with dusty candy bars. He glanced up, his gaze lingering for a moment. "You're not from around here," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm looking for the Vance property," I said, my voice feeling small and thin in the quiet store. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, a flicker of recognition. "Arthur's place," he murmured. He gave me directions in a slow, methodical drawl. 2 miles down the old quarry road. Can't miss it. Last place before the road gives up." He sold me a bottle of water and a stale granola bar. As I was leaving, he said, "Ridgeview's been sniffing around that land for years, even before Arthur passed." His words hung in the air, a quiet warning I didn't know what to do with. The walk was long. The quarry road was more of a suggestion than a path, a ribbon of cracked asphalt surrendering to weeds and dirt. The sky was a low, bruised purple, threatening rain. With every step, the silence grew deeper, broken only by the crunch of my boots on the gravel and the rustle of unseen things in the woods that pressed in on either side. I felt a growing sense of dread, a feeling that I was walking not toward a home, but an ending. Finally, I saw it. A rusted mailbox tilted on its post, the name VANCE, barely visible beneath a layer of grime. Beyond it, a dirt driveway disappeared into a tangle of overgrown trees. I pushed through the branches, which scraped at my jacket like skeletal fingers, and then the house came into view. It was small, a simple wooden structure that had once been painted white, but was now the color of bone, streaked with green mildew. The roof sagged in the middle, like a tired old man's back. Windows were boarded up, and the porch steps looked treacherous. To the right stood the barn, its red paint faded to a dull, peeling rust. The entire place seemed to be sinking back into the earth, surrendering. My heart sank with it. This wasn't a home, it was a grave. Mr. Davies was right. $10,000 was a gift. I should call them, sign the papers, and get on the first bus back to... Back to where? There was no back to. There was only this. Taking a deep breath that tasted of rot and rain, I walked up the groaning porch steps and fitted the old brass key Mr. Davies had given me into the lock. It turned with a painful, grinding screech, and the door swung inward into the darkness. The air inside the house was thick and cold, a sealed-up smell of dust, mice, and forgotten things. A single beam of watery afternoon light cut through a crack in the boarded-up living room window, illuminating a swirling universe of dust motes. Furniture lay draped in white sheets, their forms like sleeping ghosts in the gloom. A stone fireplace stood cold and black on the far wall, a gaping mouth filled with ash. I ran a hand along the back of a shrouded sofa, and a puff of dust bloomed into the air. This was where he had lived, my grandfather. The man who taught me how to whittle a piece of wood into a bird, whose hands were always calloused and gentle. I tried to picture him here, sitting in one of these chairs, reading by the fire. But the memory was too thin, too frayed. The house held no warmth for me, only a profound sense of absence. I moved through the small rooms like a trespasser. A kitchen with peeling linoleum and a single, rusted can of beans left on the counter. A tiny bathroom where the mirror was spiderwebbed with cracks. And a bedroom containing just a simple metal bed frame and a wooden dresser. I opened one of the drawers. It was empty except for a single, faded photograph at the bottom. I picked it up. It was of a woman with my eyes and a sad smile, holding a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. My mother. And me. My grandfather must have kept it all these years. A lump formed in my throat. It was the first sign that this place wasn't entirely empty. It held this one small, painful piece of my history. I tucked the photo into my pocket and left the house, unable to bear the oppressive silence any longer. The promised rain had begun to fall, a cold, persistent drizzle that soaked into my jacket. My gaze fell on the barn. It was larger than the house, a sturdy, practical structure that seemed to have weathered the years with more dignity. The big sliding door was jammed shut with rust and time, but a smaller side door, a man door, was secured with a heavy, modern-looking padlock. I didn't have a key for it. I rattled it in frustration. It felt like another rejection, another locked door in a life full of them. I circled the building, my boots sinking into the mud. Around the back, leaning against the weathered planks, was a collection of old, forgotten tools. A rusted wheelbarrow, a couple of shovels, and a heavy-duty crowbar. I looked at the crowbar, then back at the padlock. Mr. Davies' voice echoed in my head. Take the money, a clean break. But the photograph in my pocket felt warm against my leg. It was a tiny anchor, a reason to do more than just give up. I wasn't breaking into a stranger's property. This was mine, whatever that meant. I picked up the crowbar. It was heavy, the cold steel biting into my hands. I jammed the tip into the shackle of the padlock and leaned into it with all my weight. The metal groaned in protest. I grunted, my muscles straining, the frustration of the last 10 years fueling the effort. For a moment, nothing happened. And then, with a sharp, satisfying crack, the shackle snapped. The lock fell into the mud. The door swung open with a low creak, revealing the dark, cavernous interior of the barn. It was a tool barn, really. The smell hit me first, that distinct, sharp scent of engine oil, sawdust, and cold iron. It was the smell I remembered, the one I associated with my grandfather. It was the smell of safety. Unlike the house, the barn felt alive. Tools hung in neat, orderly rows on the walls, their metal surfaces gleaming faintly in the dim light. There were wrenches, saws, and drills, each in its designated place, outlined in white paint like a crime scene. A massive workbench ran along the far wall, its surface scarred with the marks of countless projects. A thick layer of dust covered everything, but underneath it was a sense of order, of purpose. This was his sanctuary. I ran my fingers along the handle of a hand plane, the wood worn smooth from his grip. This was real. This was a connection I hadn't been able to feel in the house. I spent the next hour just exploring, touching the tools, opening drawers filled with neatly sorted nuts and bolts. It was a map of his life, a testament to a man who fixed things. I felt a pang of grief so sharp it took my breath away. Why had he left me? Why had he let me go? The questions had no answers here, only the silent company of his belongings. As the light outside began to fade, my eyes were drawn back to the massive workbench. It was made of thick, heavy timbers and seemed to be bolted to the floor. Underneath it, among the shadows and cobwebs, was a stack of old, rotting lumber. It looked like forgotten scrap, but something about it seemed off. The wood was stacked just a little too neatly, too deliberately, in a space that was otherwise cluttered. A strange curiosity, a little flicker of intuition took hold. I knelt down, the damp concrete cold against my knees, and began to move the pieces of lumber. They were heavy and damp, and my hands were soon covered in splinters and grime. One by one, I pulled them away, stacking them against the opposite wall. Behind the last piece of wood, I saw it. It wasn't the wall, it was a door. Small, square, and made of heavy, dark wood, flush with the concrete foundation. It had no handle, only a small, keyhole-shaped cutout near the edge. It was almost perfectly hidden. My heart began to pound, a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. This was not normal. This was secret. I looked around the barn, my eyes scanning the organized chaos for a key. Nothing. I went back to the workbench, running my hands over its surface, checking every drawer again. In the back of a drawer filled with drill bits, my fingers brushed against something small and cold. I pulled it out. It was an old, ornate iron key, unlike any of the others. It was shaped almost like a skeleton key, but its tip was a strange, complex shape. With trembling hands, I went back to the hidden door. I knelt in the dirt and slid the key into the cutout. It wasn't a keyhole. The key fit perfectly into the shape, like a puzzle piece. I turned it, and with a low, deep thunk of a hidden mechanism, I heard a bolt slide back. I pulled the key out and used the cutout as a handle. The door was heavy, but it swung inward smoothly, silently, into absolute blackness. A gust of cool, dry air washed over me, carrying a faint, papery scent. It didn't smell like a cellar. It smelled like an archive. My phone's flashlight cut a nervous, trembling beam into the darkness. It revealed a set of steep, wooden steps leading down. I hesitated for only a second. The mystery was too strong, a pull I couldn't resist. I descended the steps, my footsteps echoing in the small space. The door swung shut behind me with a soft click, plunging me into total darkness before I could catch it. A wave of panic seized me, cold and suffocating. I fumbled with my phone, my thumb slipping on the screen before the light flared back on. I was in a small, windowless room, no bigger than a walk-in closet. But it was no cellar. The walls were lined with shelves, and the air was climate-controlled, cool and dry. It was a meticulously organized, hidden office. There was a small wooden desk, a chair, and on the desk, a single, heavy-duty metal footlocker, the kind the military uses. It was closed with two simple latches. There was nothing else in the room except for the shelves, which were filled with binders and ledgers, their spines neatly labeled with dates and codes I didn't understand. This was my grandfather's real workshop. The tools upstairs were a front, a hobby. This was his life's work. My hands shook as I approached the desk. I placed my phone on the corner, angling the light onto the footlocker. I reached out and flipped the latches. They opened with a loud snap that echoed in the silent room. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, resting on a bed of yellowed newspaper clippings, was a stack of thick, cream-colored envelopes. On the very top envelope, written in a familiar, steady cursive, was my name, Ilara. Beneath the envelopes was a thick, leather-bound journal and several stacks of documents held together with binder clips. And under all of that, neatly wrapped in brown paper, were solid, dense bricks of cash. I pulled one out. It was a stack of $100 bills. I counted the stacks. There were 20 of them. A quick mental calculation made my head spin. It had to be at least $200,000. It was more money than I had ever imagined seeing in my life. It was a fortune. But it wasn't the money that held my attention. It was the letter with my name on it. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The paper was thick, expensive. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The date at the top was from just over 2 years ago, shortly before he died. He knew he was dying. He had prepared this for me. "My dearest Ilara," it began. My eyes filled with tears, blurring the words. I wiped them away impatiently and read on. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have finally come home. I am so sorry, my girl. I am sorry for every day we lost. I need you to understand that I never stopped loving you. I never stopped thinking of you. Everything I have done, every choice I made, was to protect you." The words were a balm and a wound at the same time. I had spent 10 years believing I was abandoned, forgotten, a problem he didn't want. The truth, he wrote, was far more complicated. He hadn't been a simple carpenter. For years, he worked as a foreman for a construction company that was eventually bought out by a new, aggressive firm, Ridgeview Corp., the same company that wanted his land. He explained that Ridgeview wasn't just a developer, they were predators. They built their empire by targeting small, family-owned properties in areas slated for future development. They would use intimidation, legal loopholes, and outright fraud to force people out, buying their land for pennies on the dollar. My grandfather saw it all firsthand. He saw them threaten elderly couples, sabotage wells, and forge documents. He started collecting evidence. He copied invoices, recorded conversations, and documented every crime he witnessed. That was what filled the binders on the shelves. Years of meticulous, dangerous evidence. He was planning to go to the authorities, to a newspaper, but they found out. The letter grew darker. They didn't fire him. They tried to buy him. When he refused, they threatened him. And then they threatened me. "They knew you were all I had in the world, Ilara. They sent me a picture of you at your elementary school playground. That was the day I understood. I couldn't fight them and keep you safe at the same time. So I had to make the hardest choice of my life. I had to let you go." He had engineered it. He created a situation where the state would see him as an unfit guardian. He let his life fall apart on the surface, let them take me away, knowing that inside the foster care system, I would be anonymous, a file in a cabinet, safe from them. He became a recluse, a ghost, allowing everyone to think he was just a broken old man on a worthless piece of land. But all the while, he was watching over me from a distance, getting updates through a sympathetic social worker he trusted. And he was preparing. The money in the box wasn't his life savings, it was theirs. "They tried to bribe me one last time," he wrote. "A severance package, they called it. Hush money. I took it. I knew I could never spend it, but I knew you would need it. A way out. A fresh start, far away from all of this." My body was racked with sobs, deep, painful sounds torn from a place of childhood grief I thought had long since scarred over. I wasn't abandoned. I was protected. My entire life, the story I had told myself about being unwanted, was a lie. It was a story constructed for my own safety. He had sacrificed everything, his reputation, his home, his final years with his only grandchild, just to keep me safe. He had given up his life so I could have one. And now, I was sitting on top of the weapon he had spent years building. The evidence, the truth, and the choice of what to do with it was now mine. Before I go on, I just have to stop for a second. If you've made it this far into my story, thank you. It's not easy to talk about this stuff, and it means the world to me that you're listening. Maybe you've had a moment in your life where everything you thought was true turned out to be a lie, where you had to reassess your whole history. If you have, I want you to know you're not alone. This channel is for people like us, people who have had to find their own truth. If that's you, please consider subscribing. Let's get back to that little room under the barn. I sat there for hours, on the cold concrete floor, surrounded by the architecture of my grandfather's sacrifice. I read his journal. It was a record of his secret war. Page after page detailed Ridgeview's crimes, but woven between the cold facts were entries about me. He wrote about my birthdays, imagining what I looked like, what presents I might want. He wrote about his guilt and his loneliness, a pain so profound it felt like it was seeping out of the ink and into my hands. He wasn't just an evidence gatherer. He was a grandfather, heartbroken and resolute. The last part of his letter was the hardest to read. It laid out my choices. Alara, this is your inheritance. Not the land, not the money. The choice. You can take the money they gave me and disappear. Build a new life for yourself, somewhere safe, somewhere they will never find you. There is no shame in this. It is what I wanted for you above all else, a life of peace. Or, you can use what I've gathered. You can fight them. If you choose this path, know that it will be hard and it will be dangerous. They will not go down quietly. But you will not be alone. In the journal, you will find the name of a journalist, a man named Ben Carter. He is the only one I ever trusted. If you choose to fight, he is where you start. The choice is yours. Live free, or fight for the freedom of others they will crush. Whatever you decide, know that I am proud of you. All my love, Grandpa Arthur. I closed the letter, my tears staining the thick paper. I felt the weight of his words, the weight of 2 decades of a silent battle, settling onto my 18-year-old shoulders. It was an impossible choice. One path offered safety, security, a future free from struggle. Everything I had ever dreamed of. I could go to college, get an apartment, be a normal person. The other path, it was a continuation of his war. It was dangerous, uncertain, and terrifying. Ridgeview wasn't some faceless corporation anymore. They were the people who had stolen my childhood, who had threatened a 7-year-old girl on a playground. A cold, hard anger began to smolder beneath my grief. I opened the folder Mr. Davies had given me and looked at the offer letter from Ridgeview Corporation. $10,000 for the land. It was signed by a man named Marcus Thorne, Vice President of Acquisitions. In his journal, my grandfather had mentioned him by name. Thorne was the one who delivered the threats, the one who brought him the hush money. The $10,000 offer wasn't a business transaction. It was an insult, a final attempt to sweep my grandfather's memory and his last remaining legacy off the board. It was a test. Would Arthur Vance's granddaughter be as easily bought as they hoped? I looked at the money in the box. $200,000, a king's ransom. Then I looked at the binders lining the shelves, filled with the stories of the people Ridgeview had ruined. Families who had lost their homes, their farms, their histories. My grandfather hadn't just been protecting me. He had been fighting for all of them. What kind of life could I build with that money, knowing it was the price of my silence? What kind of peace could I find, knowing I had let them win? The girl who had walked onto this property that morning would have taken the money and run. She was scared, alone, and desperate. But she didn't know the truth. She didn't know she was the daughter of a hero. I sat there in the silence of that hidden room, the air thick with the ghosts of his words, and I felt a shift inside me. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but for the first time in my life, it was joined by something else. Purpose. The next morning, I walked back into town. The sky was a clean, crisp blue, washed clean by the night's rain. The world felt different, sharper. I felt different. I wasn't a lost girl anymore. I was a guardian of a legacy. I went to the general store and bought a prepaid cell phone and a cup of hot coffee. The old man behind the counter, the one who had given me directions, watched me as I paid. "You decide to sell?" he asked, his voice casual, but his eyes were sharp. "No," I said, my own voice clear and steady. "I've decided to stay." A slow smile spread across his weathered face. "Good," he said, and it felt like a benediction. I took my new phone outside and sat on a cold bench in front of the post office. I pulled out my grandfather's journal and found the page with the journalist's name, Ben Carter. There was a phone number next to it. My hand was shaking so badly I had to dial the number 3 times. It rang 4 times, and then a gruff, impatient voice answered. "Carter." "Is this Ben Carter?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Who's asking?" "My name is Alara Vance. I'm Arthur Vance's granddaughter." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of typing, then nothing. I thought he had hung up. "Arthur's granddaughter," he finally said, his voice softer now, laced with surprise. "I'll be damned. I tried to find you after he passed. The state stonewalled me. Where are you?" "I'm in Havenwood, at his property." "Don't talk to anyone," he said, his voice suddenly urgent. "Don't sign anything. A man named Marcus Thorne from Ridgeview Corp. Has he contacted you?" "I have an offer letter from him," I said, my heart starting to pound again. "Of course you do. Listen to me, Ilara. Your grandfather was a brave man. He told me he was collecting things, but he went silent a few years back. He said he was doing it to protect you. What did you find?" I took a deep breath. "Everything," I said. "I found everything." I heard him let out a long, slow whistle. "Don't move," he said. "I'm 5 hours away. I'm leaving now. Lock your doors. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said. The line went dead. The second call was harder. I dialed the number on Marcus Thorne's business card. A polite receptionist answered. "Ridgeview Corporation, how may I direct your call?" "I'd like to speak to Marcus Thorne, please. My name is Alara Vance." There was a brief pause. I was put on hold, subjected to a soulless corporate jingle. Then his voice came on the line, smooth and confident, like expensive whiskey. "Ms. Vance, I'm so glad you called. I trust you've had time to consider our generous offer for your grandfather's property." "I have," I said, gripping the phone tightly. "And?" "And I'm rejecting it." The silence that followed was different from the one on the phone with Ben Carter. This one was cold, heavy with unstated threat. "I see," Thorne said, his voice losing its manufactured warmth. "That would be unwise. It's a sentimental property, I understand, but it's worthless. Our offer is more than fair." "I'm not interested in what's fair," I said, my grandfather's courage flowing through me. "I'm interested in what's right." "You're a young girl," he said, his tone now openly condescending. "You don't understand the complexities of business. I understand that you threatened my grandfather. I understand that you tried to buy his silence, and I understand that you're trying to bury what you did. But my grandfather left me everything. And I mean everything." I hung up before he could respond. My entire body was trembling, a cocktail of fear and adrenaline. I had just declared war. I had made my choice. I wasn't running. I was staying. I was going to fight. The 5 hours I waited for Ben Carter to arrive were the longest of my life. I went back to the property and did the only thing I could think of to keep my hands from shaking. I worked. I started in the house, pulling off the dusty sheets, throwing open the boarded-up windows to let in the clean, cold air. I swept floors, scrubbed surfaces, and aired out the musty rooms. I was chasing away the ghosts of neglect, claiming the space as my own. With every swipe of the broom, I felt a little stronger, a little more grounded. This wasn't just a house, it was my command center, it was home. By the time a beat-up sedan rumbled down the driveway, kicking up dust, the sun was low in the sky, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink. A man got out of the car. He was older than I expected, with a shock of messy gray hair, a wrinkled trench coat, and the weary, cynical eyes of someone who had seen too much. This was Ben Carter. He walked toward me, his gaze taking in the house, the barn, and finally, me. "You have his eyes," he said without preamble. I led him to the barn, my heart pounding. I showed him the hidden door, the secret room. I watched his face as he took in the shelves of binders, the footlocker, the evidence of my grandfather's long, lonely crusade. He picked up one of the ledgers, his fingers tracing the neat columns of figures. He read my grandfather's letter to me, his expression unreadable. When he was done, he looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the cynical mask drop. In his eyes was a profound respect. "Your grandfather," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "was one of the bravest men I've ever known. He built a fortress here, not of wood and stone, but of truth." We spent the next 2 days in that hidden room. I made coffee on a camp stove I bought in town while Ben meticulously went through every file, every document, every tape recording. He spread them out on the floor, creating a timeline of corruption, a web of deceit that stretched back 15 years. It was worse than I had imagined. Ridgeview had illegally dumped toxic waste on properties to devalue them. They had blackmailed a county commissioner. They had driven at least 3 local families into bankruptcy and foreclosure through predatory legal tactics. And my grandfather had proof of all of it. As Ben worked, he told me stories about Arthur. He described him not as a recluse, but as a sharp, witty man with a fierce sense of justice. He used to say, "The only thing that grows in poisoned soil is lies," Ben recalled. He was determined to clean the soil. On the 3rd day, Ben packed up several boxes of the most critical evidence. "This is enough," he said, his eyes gleaming with a journalistic fire. "This is more than enough. This will bring them down." The threats started that evening. A black SUV with tinted windows parked at the end of my driveway for an hour, then drove away. My new cell phone buzzed with calls from an unknown number, which I ignored. They knew I had made my choice. They were trying to intimidate me. The old Alara would have been terrified, paralyzed by fear. But I wasn't her anymore. I looked at the little house, its windows now clean and glowing with lamplight. I thought of the photograph of my mother in my pocket and the weight of my grandfather's journal. I wasn't just defending a piece of land. I was defending my family. I was defending my home. That night, as Ben's first article went live on the website of a major national newspaper, I sat on the porch steps, the same ones I had been so scared to climb just days before. The story was headlined, "The Havenwood Files: How One Corporation Built an Empire on Lies." My name was in it, Alara Vance. And for the first time, seeing my name in print didn't feel like being part of a case file. It felt like standing for something. The community's reaction was slow, then sudden. The first few days, people in town were wary. They looked at me with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Ridgeview had been a shadow over Havenwood County for years, a force people knew was corrupt but were too scared to challenge. But then, things began to shift. The old man at the general store started giving me my coffee for free. An elderly woman I'd never met left a freshly baked apple pie on my porch. One day, a local farmer pulled up in his truck and spent the afternoon helping me fix the sagging roof on the barn, refusing any payment. "Your granddad was a good man," was all he said. "Stood up for my father once. It's the least I can do." They weren't just gestures of kindness. They were acts of quiet rebellion. Ben's articles, fueled by my grandfather's evidence, had cracked the dam of silence, and now a slow, steady trickle of courage was starting to flow through Havenwood. Other people started coming forward, sharing their own stories with Ben, adding their voices to the chorus. The black SUVs stopped appearing. The fight was far from over. Ridgeview's high-priced lawyers fired back with lawsuits and denials, but the damage was done. State and federal investigations were launched. Marcus Thorne resigned, then disappeared. The empire built on poisoned soil was beginning to crumble. Months have passed since that first day. The legal battles are still churning, a slow, grinding process of depositions and motions. Ben Carter is still writing, still uncovering more of the rot. I've had to give testimony to tell my story and my grandfather's story over and over again to rooms full of lawyers and investigators. It's exhausting, and some days the fear still creeps in at the edges. But I am not alone. The people of Havenwood, the ones my grandfather fought for, have become my community. They look out for me. They bring me groceries. They share stories about Arthur, painting a picture of the man I barely knew, filling in the empty spaces of my memory. They have helped me turn this forgotten piece of land into a home. The house is clean and warm now. I planted a small garden where the weeds used to be. The barn is my sanctuary, a place where I feel close to him. I've started learning to use his tools, feeling the familiar weight of them in my hands, the worn wood of the handles. I'm not fixing things, not yet. I'm just learning. I found his old whittling knives and a block of wood. I'm trying to carve a bird, just like he taught me all those years ago. My first few attempts are clumsy, misshapen things, but I'm not giving up. I've thought a lot about what inheritance really means. I used to think it was about money, about property, the things you are given. But now I know that's not it. A true inheritance is the story you are entrusted with. It's the values you are taught, the moral compass you are handed. My grandfather didn't leave me 2.5 acres of rocky soil. He left me a choice. He left me a mission. He left me his courage. The $200,000 is still in the footlocker. I haven't touched it. Ben and I talked about it, and we have a plan. When the legal battles are over, we're going to use it to start a legal aid fund for the families in Havenwood and other rural communities who are being targeted by companies like Ridgeview. The hush money will become a war chest for justice. It's what he would have wanted. His sacrifice will not just be a story that is told. It will be a shield for others. Sometimes I sit in the hidden room under the barn, surrounded by his files, and I read his journal. I'm not just his granddaughter anymore. I'm his archivist, the keeper of his truth. I am living the life he couldn't. A life of purpose, connected to a community, on the land he fought so hard to protect. It's not the easy life, the one I could have had if I'd taken the money and run. It's a hard life, a life of struggle and responsibility. But it is a good life. It's a life that matters. It's a life that's truly mine. This story, my story, is about finding a hidden door. But we all have hidden doors in our lives, don't we? Moments where we have to choose between the easy path and the right one. Places inside ourselves where we store the truth of who we are, waiting for the right key to unlock it. Maybe your inheritance wasn't land or money either. Maybe it was a lesson in resilience from a parent who struggled. Maybe it was a spark of creativity from a teacher who saw something in you. Maybe it was just the stubborn belief, passed down through generations, that you deserve to be treated with dignity. These are the things that are truly valuable. What did this story teach you about the meaning of home, or the sacrifices people make for the ones they love? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one because the stories we share are what connect us. They are what remind us that even when we feel lost or alone, we are part of something bigger. If my journey meant something to you, please subscribe and become a part of this community. We're all just trying to find our way home, and maybe we can help each other navigate the journey. Thank you for listening.